May 12, 1945, Tongda, Burma. The trench was alive with fire. The humid night air carried the hiss of insects, the rumble of distant artillery, and the sharp metallic clink of grenades landing in mud. Gurkha rifleman Lachhiman Gurung felt the earth tremble beneath him as Japanese soldiers pressed their assault. The first grenade rolled to his feet. He snatched it up, the cold steel biting into his palm, and hurled it back over the parapet. A second clattered beside him. Again, he threw it back, his ears ringing from the explosion that followed. The third came too fast. He reached for it, but the blast tore through his right hand, shredding flesh and bone. The trench filled with smoke and screams. The acrid stench of gunpowder mixed with sweat and mud. Gurung's helmet rattled against his skull as shock waves rippled through the earth. His comrades shouted orders, their voices drowned by the staccato chatter of Japanese Type 92 heavy machine guns. He staggered, clutching his rifle with his left hand. The Lee Enfield No. 1 Mk3 was heavy now, its wooden stock slick with blood. His right arm hung useless, mangled by shrapnel. Yet his heartbeat steadied. He would not leave. He would not surrender. Tracer rounds sliced through the night, illuminating the jungle canopy. The enemy advanced, bayonets glinting, their silhouettes ghost-like in the fog. Gurung braced the rifle against the trench wall, chambered a round with one hand, and prepared to fire. The jungle roared. The trench shook. Gurung's comrades looked to him, their faces pale in the flickering light. He was bleeding, half-blind from smoke, but his spirit was unbroken. And then, silence. A pause before the storm. Gurung's finger tightened on the trigger. Before we continue this unbelievable story of how one Gurkha fought with one hand against impossible odds, make sure to subscribe, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The roar of battle fades, and the story rewinds decades earlier, to the misty ridges of western Nepal. The air there was thin, crisp, and carried the scent of pine and damp earth. In a small village carved into terraced fields, a boy named Lachhiman Gurung grew up under the shadow of mountains that seemed eternal. His father, a farmer and former Gurkha soldier, told stories by the fire, tales of courage, of men who fought with the curved kukri blade, of loyalty that bound comrades tighter than blood. Lachhiman listened wide-eyed, his small hands tracing the blade's edge, imagining himself one day wielding it with honor. Life was hard. Days began before dawn, carrying water from the river, tending goats, and climbing steep ridges with baskets of grain strapped to his back. The weight of those baskets pressed into his shoulders, teaching him endurance. His mother's voice was gentle but firm, reminding him that strength meant nothing without compassion. One monsoon season, disaster struck. A flash flood tore through the valley, sweeping away homes and livestock. Lachhiman, barely a teenager, tied a rope around his waist and plunged into the raging waters. He pulled 2 children to safety, his lungs burning, his body battered by debris. That act of bravery etched itself into the memory of his village. But tragedy lingered. His younger brother fell ill and died, leaving Lachhiman with a wound no blade could heal. He swore silently that he would never let another life slip away if he could prevent it. By the late 1930s, the world trembled with rumors of war. Britain's recruiters arrived in Nepal, seeking Gurkhas for the expanding conflict. Lachhiman enlisted, driven by duty and the promise of protecting not just his homeland but the wider world. Training was brutal. The Lee Enfield rifle kicked against his shoulder, its recoil bruising but familiar. He learned to strip and reassemble the weapon blindfolded, to march for miles with full kit, to fire the Bren light machine gun until his arms shook. Sweat, mud, and the smell of oil became his companions. Yet beneath the discipline lay his vow: protect others, no matter the cost. His comrades saw him as quiet, almost reserved, but when drills demanded endurance, he never faltered. The day came when Lachhiman boarded a train bound for India. The iron wheels screeched, smoke billowed from the engine, and he stared at the horizon. His kukri rested at his side, gleaming faintly in the dim light. He knew destiny awaited him beyond the tracks. The train lurched forward, carrying him toward war. The train that carried Lachhiman Gurung into India was only the beginning. Weeks later, he and his fellow Gurkhas were deployed to the steaming jungles of Burma. The air was thick, heavy with moisture, and every breath tasted of rot and damp leaves. Monsoon rains hammered the earth, turning paths into rivers of mud. Boots squelched, uniforms clung to skin, and the smell of sweat mixed with the sweet stench of decay. The jungle was alive with enemies unseen. Leeches clung to ankles, mosquitoes swarmed, and fever stalked the camps. Yet the Gurkhas pressed forward, their discipline unbroken. Gurung carried his Lee Enfield rifle, its wooden stock swollen from humidity, and his kukri blade strapped to his belt. Each weapon felt heavier in the jungle heat, but he bore them without complaint. Their first skirmishes came suddenly. Japanese patrols moved like shadows, their Arisaka rifles cracking through the foliage. Gurung's unit responded with bursts from the Bren light machine gun, its metallic chatter echoing through the trees. Smoke from gunpowder mingled with the earthy scent of wet soil. Gurung fired calmly, each shot deliberate, the recoil jolting his shoulder. He learned quickly that survival meant silence and patience. Ambushes were frequent, Japanese soldiers charging with bayonets, their shouts piercing the night. Gurung's kukri flashed in close combat, its curved blade slicing through the chaos. Fear was constant, but so was duty. Above them, the roar of P-47 Thunderbolts shook the canopy, their bombs scattering Japanese positions. On the ground, M4 Sherman tanks struggled through mud, their engines groaning, tracks slipping. Gurung watched as one Sherman bogged down, its crew cursing, while Japanese mortars rained fire nearby. Through it all, Gurung remained steady. His comrades began to notice, his quiet endurance, his refusal to falter. He was not loud, not boastful, but when bullets flew, he was unshakable. Then came the orders: hold the village of Tongda against overwhelming Japanese forces. Radios crackled with static, voices strained with urgency. Gurung's unit prepared trenches, stacking sandbags, laying barbed wire. The jungle grew silent, as if holding its breath. Night fell, and the air grew colder. Gurung sat in the trench, his rifle across his lap, listening to the distant rumble of artillery. He thought of his brother, of the promise he had made, and of the destiny that seemed to draw closer with every heartbeat. The jungle was waiting. So was the enemy. The jungle around Tongda erupted in fury. Japanese artillery thundered from hidden positions, shells whistling through the canopy before slamming into Gurkha trenches. The ground shook violently, sending mud and splinters flying. The air was thick with smoke, acrid and suffocating, mingling with the sharp tang of sweat and gunpowder. Inside the trench, Gurung's unit crouched low. Radios crackled with broken orders, static drowning out voices from command. Ammunition crates were nearly empty, their wooden lids splintered from shrapnel. Food supplies had dwindled to stale biscuits and muddy water. The men's faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow from exhaustion. The Japanese pressed harder. Mortars rained down, their explosions echoing like thunderclaps. Gurung fired his Lee Enfield rifle, the recoil jolting his shoulder, but the weapon felt heavier with each shot. His comrades manned the Bren gun, its barrel glowing red, the smell of burning oil filling the trench. Then came the grenades. One landed close, Gurung lunged, throwing it back. Another followed, and he hurled it too. But the third detonated before he could react. The blast ripped through his right hand, shredding flesh and bone. Pain seared through him, white-hot, his ears ringing, vision blurred. Medics rushed forward, shouting for evacuation. Gurung shook his head, his jaw clenched. His right arm hung useless, mangled beyond repair. Yet his left hand gripped the rifle tighter. His comrades stared in disbelief. How could he fight like this? The trench was collapsing, sandbags torn apart, barbed wire twisted. Japanese soldiers advanced, their bayonets glinting in the dim light. Gurung's heartbeat steadied. He refused to leave. "I will fight," he muttered, voice hoarse but resolute, "with one hand if I must." The impossible problem was now laid bare, a wounded Gurkha, half disabled, facing an army determined to annihilate his unit. The jungle roared again, and Gurung raised his rifle with his left hand. The trench at Tongda was a furnace of chaos. Smoke curled upward, thick and choking, while the jungle canopy glowed faintly from tracer fire streaking across the night. Gurung's right arm was mangled, useless, But his left hand gripped the Lee Enfield No. 1 Mk3 with a ferocity that defied reason. He adapted. Bracing the rifle against the trench wall, he worked the bolt with one hand, the motion awkward but relentless. Each metallic click-clack echoed like a heartbeat. Sweat dripped into his eyes, mixing with blood, but he blinked it away. The weapon's recoil slammed into his shoulder, bruising him deeper with every shot, yet he held firm. Japanese soldiers surged forward, their silhouettes ghost-like in the fog. Bayonets gleamed, rifles cracked, and the jungle reverberated with shouts in Japanese. Gurung fired calmly, each round deliberate, each muzzle flash illuminating his determined face. The smell of cordite and burning oil filled the trench, mingling with the stench of mud and blood. His comrades watched in awe. Where others faltered, Gurung endured. He reloaded with one hand, fumbling cartridges into the magazine, his fingers slick with sweat and grime. The rifle's weight pressed into him, but his vow, to protect his brothers in arms, fueled his strength. The night grew darker, the rain heavier. Gurung's heartbeat steadied, his breathing slow, his mind focused. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a fortress. Then, through the smoke, he saw them. A wave of Japanese soldiers, nearly 200 strong, advancing in formation. Their shouts pierced the night, their bayonets catching the faint glow of tracer fire. Gurung's jaw tightened. His left hand steadied the rifle. His comrades looked to him, fear etched into their faces. The impossible moment had arrived. The jungle night was torn apart by chaos. Rain hammered the earth, mixing with mud and blood, while tracer rounds carved glowing arcs through the darkness. Gurung's trench had become a furnace of death. His comrades were exhausted, their ammunition dwindling, but Gurung, bleeding, half-blind, and armed with only one functioning hand, stood unyielding. The Japanese assault came in waves. Shadows surged forward, bayonets flashing, their war cries echoing through the trees. Gurung braced his Lee Enfield rifle against the trench wall, working the bolt with his left hand, each metallic click-clack a defiance of fate. The recoil slammed into his shoulder, bruising deeper with every shot, but he fired steadily, muzzle flashes illuminating his determined face. Grenades landed nearby, hissing in the mud. Gurung seized them with his left hand, flung them back, the explosions ripping through enemy ranks. The acrid stench of gunpowder filled the trench, mingling with sweat and the metallic tang of blood. His comrades shouted encouragement, their voices hoarse, but it was Gurung who anchored them, his presence a wall against despair. The Japanese machine guns rattled, the Type 92 heavy gun spewing fire, its sound a relentless hammer. Gurung ducked, mud splattering across his helmet, then rose again, firing into the advancing silhouettes. His rifle barrel glowed faintly, hot from constant use, the smell of burning oil rising with the steam of rain. Hours passed like minutes. The jungle was alive with screams, the crack of rifles, the hiss of mortars. Gurung's trench became a fortress, his one-handed defiance a legend in the making. His comrades fought beside him, but it was Gurung's steady rhythm, fire, reload, throw, fire, that kept the line intact. Then, disaster struck. As another wave of Japanese soldiers charged, Gurung pulled the bolt back, and the rifle jammed. The metallic grind froze his heart. He tried again, forcing the mechanism, but the mud and blood had clogged it. The enemy was closing in, bayonets gleaming, their shouts rising like thunder. The trench shook with fear. Gurung's comrades looked to him, their eyes wide. He gripped the rifle tighter, his left hand trembling, his breath ragged. The jungle roared, the night burned, and the enemy was almost upon him. The rifle was useless. The enemy was near. Gurung's fate balanced on the edge of steel. The trench was collapsing into chaos. Smoke curled upward in choking waves, tracer fire streaked across the jungle canopy, and the cries of wounded men mingled with the relentless thunder of Japanese rifles. Gurung's Lee Enfield rifle was jammed, its bolt locked tight with mud and blood. The enemy was closing in, bayonets gleaming, their war cries rising like a storm. For a heartbeat, silence gripped him. Then, with a surge of determination, Gurung slammed the rifle against the trench wall, forcing the bolt free. The metallic grind echoed like salvation. He chambered a round with his left hand, braced the weapon, and fired. The shot cracked through the night, dropping the lead attacker. The Japanese faltered, but the wave pressed on. Gurung's comrades shouted, their voices hoarse, but it was Gurung who anchored the line. He fired again, and again, each muzzle flash illuminating his bloodied face. His left hand trembled from exhaustion, but his aim was steady, his vow unbroken. When the rifle's magazine emptied, Gurung reached for his kukri. The curved blade gleamed in the dim light, slick with rain. He gripped it tightly, his left arm burning with strain, and rose from the trench. The Japanese soldiers surged forward, bayonets thrusting, but Gurung met them head-on. His kukri slashed through the chaos, each strike fueled by desperation and duty. The jungle became a blur of steel and screams. Gurung fought like a man possessed, his blade carving arcs of defiance. The Japanese, stunned by his ferocity, began to falter. Their cries shifted from rage to fear. One by one, they fell back, retreating into the shadows. 200 men had charged. 200 had been broken. Gurung, bleeding and half-conscious, collapsed into the mud. His comrades rushed to him, their faces pale, their voices trembling. The trench was silent now, save for the distant rumble of retreating footsteps. Medics scrambled forward, their hands shaking as they tried to lift him. His body was broken, his right arm mangled, his left hand raw from battle. Yet his eyes remained open, defiant, alive. The jungle was quiet. The impossible had been done. The jungle at Tongda was hushed now, as if nature itself mourned. Smoke drifted in slow spirals above shattered trees, mingling with the heavy mist of dawn. The ground was scarred with craters, littered with broken helmets, twisted rifles, and the silent forms of men who had fought until their last breath. Medics moved quickly, their boots sinking into mud, their hands trembling as they lifted the wounded. The sharp scent of antiseptic cut through the lingering stench of gunpowder and blood. Amid the wreckage lay Lachhiman Gurung, his right arm mangled beyond repair, his left hand blistered and raw from gripping steel through the night. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes remained open, defiant, alive. Around him, comrades whispered his name. They had seen him fight with one hand, hurl grenades back into enemy ranks, reload a rifle against impossible odds. They had watched him stand when others fell, his kukri flashing in the darkness, his courage unyielding. 200 Japanese soldiers had charged, and 200 had been broken. The jungle bore witness to his defiance. Rain eased, leaving behind a heavy silence. Smoke hung low, muffling the cries of the wounded. Gurung's comrades knew they had survived because of him. His vow, to protect others, no matter the cost, had been fulfilled in the most brutal way imaginable. Weeks later, in the aftermath of Burma's campaign, Gurung was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest honor for valor. Yet medals could not capture the weight of that night. The silence, the screams, the smell of burning oil, the sight of one man standing against an army. For the Gurkhas, his story became legend. For the world, it became a reminder. Courage is not measured by strength of body, but by strength of spirit. The jungle eventually grew quiet again, vines reclaiming trenches, rain washing away blood. But the echo of that night remained. One hand, one rifle, one man, an army unto himself. If this story moved you, share it so others never forget the courage of men like Lachhiman Gurung. His sacrifice reminds us that even in the darkest nights of war, one man's defiance can light the way for generations.